I was just trying to get back home. Midnight, empty road, headlights cutting through the fog. But one wrong turn, just one, and suddenly the highway was gone. My GPS glitched out. My phone had no signal. And ahead of me, a town I swear I've never seen on any map. The people smile too wide. The clocks don't tick right. And every time I try to leave, the road brings me right back to where I started. I think I'm stuck here. And I don't think this town was ever supposed to exist. I should be known better than to get behind the wheel that night, not because I was tired or drunk or anything like that, but because something in the air just felt wrong, like the sky was too quiet and the stars were watching too closely, and maybe if I'd paid more attention to that chill crawling down my spine, I wouldn't have ended up barreling down a narrow country road that didn't show up on my GPS, with my headlights slicing through a fog so thick it looked alive, curling and creeping. Like it wanted to swallow the car whole, but I kept driving anyway because that's what you do when your mind is a mess and your heart's been cracked open by someone you thought you knew, someone who made promises and then broke them like they were glass underfoot, and I didn't want to be home staring at the photos on the wall or smelling her perfume still hanging in the hallway air, so I just drove, engine humming low, tires whispering secrets to the pavement as the highway stretched on into nothing, and then, just past mile marker 87, the radio cut out, the music fizzled into static, and my phone lost signal like I'd driven off the edge of the map, and when I glanced around, I realized the trees looked different, too symmetrical, too still, as if the whole world had stopped to hold its breath, and that's when I saw it, a glowing sign that read "Welcome to Ellisdale," with freshly painted letters and flowers planted beneath it, except I'd lived in this part of Oregon my entire life, and had never once heard of a town called Ellisdale, but I figured maybe it was one of those tiny communities you just never notice, so I took the turn, figured I'd find a gas station, maybe a coffee shop, maybe a place to stop and breathe, but what I found instead was something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare. White picket fences lined every street, pastel houses with manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, and not a single car on the road except mine, not a single person in sight except one man in a postal uniform who smiled a little too wide when I rolled down my window and asked for directions, and he said, "No need to leave, you're already home," then walked away before I could say another word, disappearing between two identical houses like a ghost, and when I tried to turn around, to get back to the main road, the street just looped. No matter how many times I drove in what I thought was the opposite direction, I kept ending up back at the same corner store, with the same neon sign flickering above the door, and I swear, the same old woman behind the register stared at me each time, never blinking, never moving, just smiling with red lipstick smeared too far across her cheeks, and I thought maybe I was losing my mind, maybe grief and exhaustion had finally melted my brain, but the car was real, the road was real, the fear in my chest was real, and then I tried to leave on foot, left the car by the store and walked straight through the backyards, through fences and fields, trying to reach the trees at the edge of town, but when I pushed past the last row of houses, there was a wall, a smooth gray concrete wall stretching endlessly in both directions like some kind of prison perimeter, and no matter how far I walked, I couldn't find an end, couldn't find a break or a gate or a weakness, just cold stone and silence, until I heard footsteps behind me, multiple sets, closing in fast, and when I turned around, there were 5 people in matching smiles and white aprons, holding gardening tools like weapons, and the one in front said, "You're not supposed to be back here," in a voice that didn't match his face, like it was dubbed over from another body, and I ran until my lungs were fire and my legs screamed and I collapsed on someone's front porch, pounding on the door, begging to be let in, but no one answered, and when I looked behind me, they were gone, just gone, like they'd never been there, and all I could hear was the gentle buzz of the street lights and the distant hum of music playing from somewhere deep in the town, and that's when I realized something even more disturbing. This place wasn't just strange, it was watching me, adjusting to me, changing around me, like it was alive and learning, and I had a feeling that if I didn't figure out what it wanted soon, I was going to become just another smiling face behind the register, or a postman, or worse, whatever was behind that concrete wall I still hadn't climbed over. But I'd made up my mind, I wasn't going to fade into this town, I was going to find the truth, or I was going to burn this place down trying. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't not with the way the shadows danced across the walls of the abandoned house I broke into after I realized the doors in Ellisdale didn't open unless they wanted to, and the house I chose had dust on the windowsills and no family photos, no furniture, just a ticking clock with no hands and a mirror that didn't reflect me, and I kept hearing something in the walls, a scratching, slow and methodical like someone carving words into the beams, and I tried to ignore it, tried to calm my breathing and think logically, but logic doesn't belong in a place like Ellisdale, logic gets twisted here. Logic told me I was safe in a house with a door I barricaded using a chair and my own weight, but something still slipped inside, because when I woke up to the sun that never fully rises here, I wasn't alone anymore. There were footprints on the dusty floor, small and bare, like a child had been walking in circles around me all night, and in the corner of the room sat a porcelain doll that hadn't been there when I laid down, its head tilted at an angle too sharp to be natural, eyes too glossy to be dead, and pinned to its chest with a rusted safety pin was a note in perfect cursive that read, "You're waking up," and I swear to God when I blinked, the doll had moved an inch closer, so I ran. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of that house, back into the streets that never changed, never aged, just looped and shimmered under a sun that never moved across the sky, and I started talking to the people, really talking, not just asking questions, but watching their faces when I did, how their smiles never touched their eyes, how they blinked in sync like some hive mind puppetry, and I met a boy, maybe 10 years old, sitting on the curb playing with a broken slinky, and when I crouched beside him and asked where his parents were, he whispered, "They're in the basement," and pointed toward the school, and when I asked what he meant, he just said, "They're waiting for the bell," before getting up and walking backward into the mist, and I didn't see him again, but something about the way he said it chilled me deeper than the fog ever could. So I went to the school, a squat red brick building with a playground covered in perfectly still swings and a flag that didn't flap in the wind because there was no wind, and I snuck inside through a back window, found the halls dustless and humming with a low static, lockers all shut, classroom doors all ajar, and I walked until I found a staircase leading down, and that's when I smelled it, earth, wet and rotting, like something had been buried alive and never stopped breathing, and the walls down there were stone, not brick, slick with moss and something else I didn't want to touch, and there were candles burning without flames. Just soft white glows like memories trapped in wax, and I followed them deeper until I found a room, circular and domed like an underground cathedral, and in the center was a pool, still and black, but reflecting stars that didn't exist in the sky above, and around the edge stood 7 people in white, heads bowed, hands clasped, whispering in tongues I didn't recognize but somehow understood, like my bones remembered them, and I should ve run then, should ve turned and climbed back into the world I knew, but I stepped closer, drawn like gravity, and one of them looked up and said my name, my full name, middle and all, and then smiled and said, "You've finally arrived," and they parted to make room, beckoning me toward the pool, and I asked them what was going on, what this place was, and the oldest one said, "You took the road when the veil was thin, and now you've come to remember," and then he pointed to the pool and told me to look, just look, and I did, and what I saw wasn't my reflection but 1,000 versions of me, living different lives, making different choices, some happy, some monstrous, and they all looked up at me and screamed in unison, their mouths open in terror, and I stumbled back, heart pounding, throat raw, and that's when the room changed, the walls pulsing like a heartbeat, the candles flaring, and they all turned toward me and began chanting, louder now, words that rattled the fillings in my teeth, and I knew I wasn't supposed to be there, not really, not yet, that this was a place for something beyond understanding, and I ran back up the stairs, out of the school, through the town that no longer looked like a town but a set piece peeling at the edges, and the people were all frozen now, standing in their yards, staring at the sky, mouths open wide, not breathing, not blinking, and overhead, the sun flickered like a dying bulb, revealing something behind it, something massive, spinning, watching, and I knew, deep down, that Ellisdale wasn't a town, it was a pocket, a glitch, a wound in the skin of reality that had swallowed me whole, and now it wanted to keep me, because I'd seen too much, felt too much, remembered too much, but I wasn't going to let it. I was going to find the edge, the crack, the flaw, and claw my way back out if I had to tear the whole place down brick by brick. But as I sprinted through the loop again, the buildings began to shift, melting into each other, growing taller, windows turning into eyes, roads splitting into mouths, and the entire town began to breathe like one enormous beast, and I knew Ellisdale wasn't a place, it was alive, and I wasn't trapped in it, I was inside it, and it was waking up. I don't know how long I sat in that chair staring at the blood-streaked envelope, my hands trembling, my ears still echoing with the sound of my uncle's final scream from the basement. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, but inside, the chaos hadn't even begun to settle. I knew then that the truth wasn't just buried beneath our house, it was wrapped around every decision my father had ever made. I couldn't sit there forever. I needed answers. I needed to know who I was. I walked down the hall to my father's study, the one room in the house we were never allowed to enter growing up. The door was locked, but a key was taped under the light switch. Of course it was. Inside, it smelled like old cedar and whiskey. There were books everywhere, legal books, philosophy, old journals. But what caught my eye was a small chest in the corner. I opened it, and inside were letters, all addressed to me, from my mother. Letters dated every year since she supposedly died. But they were never mailed. My dad had kept them hidden. My hands shook as I opened the first one. "My sweet boy, I hope one day you read this and know that I never stopped loving you. I had to leave, for your safety and mine." The words blurred through my tears. Every letter peeled back another layer of lies. My father had lied about everything. My mother wasn't dead, she'd been forced out. I felt the walls closing in. The room spun as memories flashed, my dad keeping us isolated, homeschooled, away from the world. My uncle used to hint that there was more to our story. I thought he was just bitter. But now he was dead. My mother was alive. And I was standing in the middle of the house that had swallowed all their secrets. I packed the letters, the journal, and that cursed envelope, and I drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, but my gut told me to go west. I ended up in Oregon, at a small address scrawled on the last letter. When I knocked on the door, a woman with my eyes answered. She gasped. We didn't speak for a full minute. We just stared at each other. When she finally whispered, "You look just like him," I didn't even know who she meant. Me or my father. That night, she told me everything. About how my dad got involved with some radical cult that believed in purity through control, how he was rising through the ranks, how she threatened to expose them. He told her to run or die. She ran. Left me behind. She thought he'd spare me. She was wrong. But she was back now. And she was ready to help me take everything down. Over the next few months, we gathered evidence. Photos. Documents. Names. Every person my father manipulated or ruined. We tracked their movements. My mother knew how they operated. She'd been inside. When we finally handed everything over to the FBI, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. But that peace didn't last. One morning, I woke up to find a note slid under my door. "You were never meant to know. We're watching." I don't know who they were. I don't know how they found me. But I know they're real. And I know they're still out there. I don't use my real name anymore. I don't stay in one place too long. I tell my story in pieces to strangers who don't know they're listening. I post clues online, burying them in threads and comments, hoping someone else finds what I did. Because if I disappear, I want someone to know. The day I found that envelope, I thought it would ruin me. But it saved me. It showed me the truth. My name doesn't matter now. Just remember this: if someone tells you a story that sounds too twisted to be real, listen. Because sometimes the worst monsters don't live under your bed. They live in your family photos.